Namaste, greetings.
Namaste.
Great to have Dr. Prasad Kaipa with us today. And this is a presentation from itsdiff News, Views and Music production that we are trying to revive from our Stanford University days. Dr. Prasad Kaipa, I know him for like almost more than a decade. He came onto our Stanford radio show, great executive coach, and on leadership principles, and in fact, Vedantic principles, and teaching a lot of management practices, etc. So in the next few minutes, we are going to talk about some of the leadership principles, management guidelines, theory and practices, and the uniqueness in which Dr. Prasad Kaipa deals with business, technology, and as well, he puts the Vedantic principles, otherwise the spirituality into it as a unique combination. So we are going to take the opportunity to have Dr. Prasad Kaipa unpack this for us. So let me start with this. Hope you all will enjoy this conversation. And again, this is being brought to you by itsdiff. And wanted to share a brief intro on Dr. Prasad Kaipa, and then we'll get on with Dr. Prasad. So Dr. Prasad Kaipa got his PhD in physics from IIT Madras and was an assistant professor in University of Utah in the early 80s. That's when he discovered Macintosh from Apple, and soon he was an employee of Apple. He worked as manager, software product marketing in Apple International, manager, School of Technology in Apple University, and then as a fellow in Apple University as well. He researched how people learn, think, create, and collaborate by interviewing 17 Nobel laureates and 200 extraordinaries. In 1990, he left Apple and later taught in different business schools in US and India, including Indian School of Business and USC in visiting roles. He wrote 3 books, and they were translated into multiple languages. To name a few, we have From Smart to Wise, You Can, and we'll talk more about these books and what are the general thematic concepts on this one. And he has been a CEO coach and worked with both Global Fortune 1000 and startup C-suite executives, and retired in 2019. He integrated management with spirituality and brain research in his work. So there's going to be a little bit of artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning concepts, and also a lot of things which will be of a lot of interest to people. And one thing which I like from one of the books that I would like to read before I start the discussion, which is Dr. Prasad Kaipa believes in the entire ecosystem to benefit from the actions that the individual take, which is a very interesting thought process. And we're going to have him explain that. And one thing is a rising tide lifts all boats. So I'm going to invite Dr. Prasad Kaipa to rise the tide and lift all of us spiritually, technically in the business transformation. So this is Sri Srinivasa for itsdiff. Once again, take great pleasure and honor to welcome Dr. Prasad Kaipa to our program. Namaste.
Namaste, and thank you very much, Sri. It is such a pleasure to reconnect with you again after 2005, I think, 2006, sometime around that in Stanford.
Yeah.
It has been a long time, and it's great to be on your show. And thank you for a wonderful introduction. I'll have to look behind and see whether you are talking about somebody else. So where would you like to start?
Sure, definitely. One thing which interested me was we all learned about, or still learning, technology and business as things that are going together, combined together, blended together for success, and which includes process systems together. In other words, for example, now in your speech, in your papers and other things, I've seen you have brought in the third angle, which is spirituality as well. Right. Could you please explain as to how spirituality ended up there in connection with combination with technology and business?
Sure. In 1980s, when I was in Apple, we were designing tools for that augment human intelligence. Obviously, now, the AI and the Siris and OK Google and Alexa are popular. But at that time, when we were looking at intelligence, we wanted to design something that we knew very clearly that what you might call a continuous speech and all the technology that is required, all the bandwidth that is required, all the processing power that is required to do the AI like what we have was not available at that time. So we were trying to think about, instead of AI, we looked at what we called IA, intelligent agents. That is what we have at this moment. But the concept of intelligent agents came about in 1988-89. So if we are going to look at intelligent agents and artificial intelligence, we started thinking about how do we define intelligence and how do we make people intelligent? Like in education, Apple had a big market share at that time. And we thought, how do we help students and teachers and professors, all of them, to have better tools for them to do whatever they are doing, whether it is the teaching part, research part, learning part, creating course materials, or any of them. Apple had something called a Wheels for the Mind, where they encouraged students and teachers and academics to develop software programs and hardware tools and all of them. But my interest at that time, I got hooked up with another great person who was remarkable, like a Bill Atkinson. And we both were actually kind of mentored by a gentleman called Alan Kay, who was the father of personal computing. So it is Bill Atkinson who talked about what we call, designing a learning processor. So, first we went to Seymour Papert and Marvin Minsky and Rodney Brooks from Carnegie Mellon and some of the ways of looking at artificial intelligence. It was very clear that whatever we had at that time was not sufficient to develop any kind of meaningful technology tools in Apple that we could call as a learning processor. So from there, we went one level deeper. We looked at it and said, all right, if we can design a learning processor, let's go back to fundamental principles of learning. What is the nature of learning? What is called learning? Then we realized learning has an aftermath. So that means once you learn, you can say, oh, I learned how to swim, how to do programming, or how to design a car. But the process of getting to that seems to be messy, seems to be what you might call a random process where you go through a series of different kinds of things, and then suddenly you have an aha moment and you end up with being able to do certain things. So that means before math for learning is messy, it's all confusing. But aftermath for learning is creativity. Aftermath for learning is design. Aftermath for learning is what you might call new set of capabilities. So that is how we looked at how do we design technology tools for learning required us to go back and examine what does learning really mean? Is it skill acquisition? Is it knowledge acquisition? Is it competency building? Is it capacity building? What do we call learning? Then we realized schools teach learning by focusing on knowledge. So the books and the videos and all of them. Whereas if you go to work, like if I were to come to Tesla, I might have fantastic experience or education in wherever I went to. But the moment I come in to work for a company, then I realize there are politics, there are processes, there are ways in which things get done, there are tools that I need to use, there are systems that I need to follow, there are procedures that are standard in the company that I work for. So that means I need to develop skills, not just knowledge. So it takes some time for a person to learn how the culture works. So what we realized was behind all of this knowledge and skills and all of them, there are fundamental philosophies. So behind the psychology of learning, there was a philosophy of learning we need to understand. So at that time, I realized philosophy was articulated extraordinarily well. In Indian Vedanta, there was a book called Methods of Knowledge. Actually, there was one Visistadvaita scholar who had written a translation of Nyaya Sutras and Nyaya Sastra and published by Tirumala Tirupati Devasthanam, which talked about knowledge, data, information, various architecture of knowledge extraordinarily well, that I discovered in 88, 89. And as I looked at it, that got me to think about how does philosophy fit in. And then I went in deeper into other philosophies. And next thing I know, I'm seeing a very nice integration between philosophy, not just religion, but the underlying principles, values, and the what you might call theory behind any kind of a religion. That's how I integrated philosophy, technology, and of course, it has to have an application, which is business.
Yeah, I took some notes here. I remember what my father used to say as a Sanskrit subhashitam, Vidya Dadadi Vinayam, Vinayatyadi Patradam, Patratvam Dhanamapnoti, Dhanat Dharmam Tatasukam. Did I say that correctly? I mean, yes. I'm trying to remember from my childhood days.
Correct.
The humility, the attitude, right? Yeah. Yeah, and everything. And then, of course, with that knowledge that you gained, then you can do the good deeds and then help, then you prosper. But in the process, you help others. So that's about community service. You're right. What a great learning that I just remembered incidentally. Thank you.
That's a nice thing. Yeah. Vidya Dadati Vinayam. The more you learn, more humble you have to become. And that connects with even level 5 leadership. Actually, another Stanford person had talked about. So there were two people who wrote a book called Good to Great. And, he talks about level 5 leadership. Jim actually came up with the concept of level 5 leadership. And basically, he says humility is the biggest characteristic of a level 5 leader. So, Vidya Dadati Vinayam. Vidya, actually, the fundamental thing that it gives is humility is a great place to start. A level 5 leader. So, Vidya Dadati Vinayam. Vidya, actually, the fundamental thing that it gives is humility is a great place to start.
Very nice. Vidwan Sarvatra Pujyate. Very nice. Thank you. So let's just move on to that. So in fact, that reminds me, Dr. Prasad Kaipa ji, Mahabharata and what Mahabharata teaches some of the leadership principles. Yeah. You've written a big paper or book on that. Could you tell at least the sarams or the concept of that, please?
Sure. In
just
2012, right, there was a what you call a paper that I published called Wise Decision Making from Lessons of Mahabharata. Because, ultimately leadership, it doesn't matter whether it's a non-profit leadership or a corporate leadership or an entrepreneurial leadership. For me, leadership comes down to 3 principles. One is, how do you make decisions? Easy decisions anybody can make. But if you have to fire your best friend, or you have to, what you might call, tell your spouse who is your entrepreneurial partner that you may have to let her, off the board, or even, in the worst scenario, if she has become a liability for the startup and investor says, your spouse need to go. How do you communicate to your spouse who co-founded the entrepreneurial startup that she has become a liability? So making tough decisions, making difficult decisions is one of the leadership characteristics. Second one is, you can make those decisions, but how do you communicate them effectively? Because several times when you communicate difficult decisions, you lose relationships. But if you can communicate it in a way that it is good for them and good for you and good for the organization, that is an extraordinary skill. So leadership is about making difficult decisions, communicating difficult decisions. Like, for example, recently Brian Chesky wrote a note saying that Airbnb will lay off 25% of its people. But the letter that he wrote is amazing. It's really compassionate. It's circulating all around, because the way he communicated it is very heartwarming and doesn't alienate people, whether it is the employees that he's letting go or any other customers for that matter. So that is second characteristic. The third one is taking action. You can talk about all the things, but then people send the managers who need to let go of people, they send their human resources people to do the exit interviews and to say bye to them. They don't even have sometimes courage to say to their own people, I'm going to let you go. They will say, I'm really sorry, my bosses wanted to let you go, kind of thing. Right?
It's a tough thing. It's a little bit relationship and a little bit sensitive topic for the COVID-19 situation, particularly here.
Yes. So these three things, decision making, communication and action, are three most important leadership characteristics no matter what. So the wise decision making is something extraordinarily important right now. So if you look at political scenery, whether it is in the United States or anywhere else in the world, the kind of decisions that need to be made and the way in which we communicate to global bodies or local bodies, and how do we take actions that are appropriate for people to get out of both the economic predicament that we got into without necessarily losing a lot of life. It requires enormous amount of empathy. So there are, at a political level, you see a lot of different kinds of things: city mayors, governors, president, world bodies. Depending on whether you are a Democrat or a Republican, you might have your own opinion about how to do. So as a leader, how do you make decisions? So I took stories from Mahabharata and I compared them with brain research on how limbic system gets affected, how prefrontal cortex is necessary in making the cognitive decisions, looking at some of the research on how we make decisions from neurological perspectives. I gave some recommendations on how to make ethical decisions and wise decisions in that paper.
No, fantastic. Very nice to listen to those beautiful stories and the learnings that it brings in. There is a sense of accountability, sense of responsibility, and also one of the leadership principles that we can learn from this. So thank you, Prasad ji, for that. Learnings from the combination of spirituality, business, and technology together. How was it received when you in your executive coaching sessions and leadership sessions?
For example, there was a time when I was coaching a large Fortune 500 CEO on making a decision with respect to buying a division in which later became a division, another company, a small competitor in Denver. And as they were making decisions, there were three things which bothered the CEO. The balance sheet looked really impeccable, and everything looked very well packaged. And the conversation with the CEO, the company that he was acquiring, always went really as it was supposed to go. But of course, the big company CEO got really concerned. It looks like everything is packaged. I do not know if I open the wrapper, what I see inside the package is actually going to match what is out there. So we had to really look at it from the perspective of, number one, not just the data and not just how the data is put together. We needed to look at the context in which that data came through. If the last quarter number, everything might be impeccable, but is that all leveraged? Is that all short-term prospects look good, long-term there is no future kind of stuff? How do you determine it? Only if you go based on data and information. We needed to really look at what's going on. So I found out that using certain philosophical perspective, not just database perspective, And taking the CEO, the acquiring company CEO, took the to be acquired company CEO for a long walk, and he was chatting about what does the CEO plan after he retires, because he sells the company, what is he planning to do? And once he heard various things that that person has really looked at, he realized he never cared about people. He never cared about the company itself. He was actually, for the 26 million that he was going to get as a part of his compensation, what he has to do, what he was planning to do, had nothing to do with any of this type of stuff. And then he talked to a couple of other people who were in the management team. Then it became very clear to him that there is something which he cannot put his finger on, but he was very uncomfortable. He let it go, and within about 4 months, the entire company in Denver fell apart. Because there were ways in which technology and information could not prove something, but certain intuition, certain way to look at who are these people, what are they doing, while they are all prepackaged, what are their interests, how much they care about their own people, how much they care about their own technology. Once he began to look at some of those type of things, it was very clear that if he were to buy that company, he would have lost the $70 million he was going to invest in that particular one. So sometimes I find coaching some of the people, I can't come from just the business like a balance sheet. I can't just look at the technology that seems to be very well put together. I need to go back to certain deeper sense of philosophy and ethics and spirituality to understand where are people coming from, where are people going, and by looking at their own life path, can we actually derive how they might have created the company and how useful that is. So that's how I'm trying to.
Thank you so much. I think my key takeaways are like understand the context and also the caring nature of how you take care of your people, the relationship. I think one of the leadership principles is you are here an enabler and you are an unblocker, and then you are just trying to get the capabilities of your team expanded. In other words, like expanding the capacity. So Dr. Prasad Kaipa, that was a very interesting example. In fact, the real life scenario that you just shared. Thank you so much for that. So now I would like to move on to my next question. In your book, where you say from smart to wise, there must be a lot of guiding principles that you recommended, how one can kind of deal with situations and how we can get the from better to best, etc. But the first question is how to be smart itself is the first step that we got to figure out. Then the question of how from smart to being wise. So what are your advice and for us?
Sure.